Welcome to Year 2 of the Funding Love podcast. I'm Mallory Elrod.
And I'm Caitlin Duckworth. We are two adoptive moms that seek to love, support, and elevate all corners of the adoption triad, including adopted families, adoptees, and birth parents.
We do that through honest conversation with both expert and everyday voices about all things adoption and more, all while running our nonprofit, Funding Love.
We create post-adoption experiences that strengthen bonds, build community, and restore people.
We are Funding Love,
the podcast. Hey guys, it's Kate here. On today's show, we have returning guest Allison Olson. Allison is a wife, a mama of two, and an author. Allison joined us back on episode 29 to talk about her children's book, and she has joined us again today to talk about her brand new children's book that is being released in just a couple weeks. Allison is both an adoptee and an adopted mom, so she has such a unique and important perspective. Her mission is to change the adoption narrative from the lucky child to the loved child through children's literature. We just love her so much and absolutely loved our conversation with her. So we hope y'all enjoy. Allison, welcome back to the Funding Love podcast. We are so excited and thrilled that you're back, that you've come and joined us again.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Oh, this is going to be so fun to chat with you because you were with us back on episode 29. I had to go back in our log and look. I was like, gosh, when was that? 29. And this is episode 80. So like, yay, I don't know. I guess that was a year ago, 50 some weeks ago. So and when we chatted before, we talked about your children's book titled Surrounded by Love, which is an open adoption story, which we absolutely love. And today you're here to talk with us about your new children's book. So I'm going to let you tell us what the title of that book is.
Sure. My new book is called Learning About My Friend's Adoption, and it launches on October 24th on Amazon. And it is a groundbreaking book, you guys. It is one of the first of its kind to intentionally educate children that are not adopted about adoption.
That is so great. And then when you say this out loud, I'm like, how has no one wrote a book about this yet?
Agreed.
Although I have to say, I'm really glad that you're the one to do it because your first book is so cute. And I love that this is a continuing story. So yeah, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Sure. So as you guys know, my mission is to change the adoption narrative from the lucky child to the loved child. And my first book, Being Surrounded by Love, was intended to help educate the adoptee. And the more I started thinking about it, I realized that we need education for everyone else as well, right? So for children that are not adopted. And I started looking into, just realizing that within our bubble, within our adoption community bubble, we have made huge progress, right? So there's a lot less secrecy around adoption. Yeah. We all try to focus and learn constantly as adoptive parents around, what is the right positive adoption language right now, all of that. And so within the bubble, we have made extensive progress. Now, look outside the bubble a little bit. Right. And I will go so far as to say, and for anyone that doesn't know me, I am both an adoptee and an adoptive parent. So I have a little bit of a different perspective on this. But I will go so far as to say outside of the adoption community, I feel like it's the 1950s. I get the craziest things said to me. It just depends on what they hear first. If they hear that I'm an adoptee, I get the, oh, well, where are your real parents?
Oh, yes.
Comment. And then they find out I'm an adoptive parent and it's over the top. Gosh, oh, thank you. Oh, what a lucky child to have. And I'm just like, no, and no. Like, yes. I don't know where to start. And I thought about it and I'm like, how do you educate adults? You educate them when they're kids. And so I'm not going to start by tackling the toughest thing, which is educating adults that have already got these things in their head. I thought, let's educate them as their children. And a lot of parents are trying to educate kids on diversity, diverse ways that different families are made, diverse different people. And so I'm like, this is what is needed out in the community. So that was my angle. And my hope is that this book can both, it can educate children that are currently friends of adoptees that could become future friends of adoptees, and also that it can take the heavy load off of the adoptees. So there is a burden right now that we're putting on the young adoptees that we're unaware of, right? But as an adoptee myself, I know that this always happens, and it's the education piece. So if we are not educating other children that are not adopted, our nieces and nephews, our friends' kids, that all falls on our kids to then do the educating. And so that's my hope with the book, that it can educate kids and that it can help to take the heavy load off.
No, that's right.
Yes.
You got to start with like the next generation, because when somebody says something to you like that, like a stranger out in public or whatever says something, you're not going to sit there and educate them in that moment, because you're just kind of like, all right, it's not worth it. I'm just going to you're like, oh yeah, great. Thumbs up, and then you keep going, because you're like, in this moment, I'm not really, it would take you a long time to like lay out the groundwork, right? So you just kind of let it go. But you think to yourself, oh my gosh, this is one person. So what does everybody think? And you're so right when you start with the kids of this generation to take it into, that is a really good, that is, and the power of story, honestly, storytelling, and for kids to have that imagination and to learn through this, make-believe story and then see it in real life. It's so powerful.
Yes, and I think that inevitably when you're like gifting this book, it's such an adorable book. The artwork is just as adorable as the first, because it's like that continuing story, like we said. But if you gift it to, say, one of my children's friends, their parents are going to read it to them. So you kind of are getting in there and helping the parents understand more as well through reading this book aloud. So I think that it's the perfect way to introduce this outside of the bubble. I really do.
I actually got a review today on Amazon about it, because the ebook had launched first. And it was the sweetest thing, because it said, I was reading this to my kids and I learned about adoption. I just thought, yes.
Mission accomplished. That's so great, because you're absolutely right. The education surrounding the adoption community being put forth outside of the adoption bubble is so important, which I think is really cool about what we do at Funding Love too, because being that we are so closely tied with like Disney Vacations, anybody can like relate to that and want to enter into that. And so I think it's the same with like children's literature and children's picture books, especially. I feel like even at like parents that don't love to read themselves still will find themselves snuggled up on a couch reading a picture book to their kids. And so I think it's a very accessible way to educate. And so I'm just so excited. I'm excited to get my own copy. Come on October 24th.
Yeah. And let's just go back, Mel. You mentioned the illustration is just adorable. And I'm going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first book, Surrounded by Love, and then now this one, the little girl has grown up a little bit. Is that correct?
I love that you guys noticed that. So
I'm like, she looks like a little bit older, more school aged. And,
yes. And she is the adoptee in this book, explaining this story. So yes, I love that you guys noticed that, because I like to come with specifically to you guys and give my little Easter eggs, because I always hide Easter eggs in my book. So for anyone, I'll just kind of describe the book. So what happens is a little kid is excited to tell his family about what he learned that day from his friend. So as many of us do, we're around the dinner table and he is telling his family like, oh my gosh, like my friend, she's just like me. Like she likes to play. She likes to do all these things, but she's adopted and I didn't know what that meant. And so here's what she told me. And then it goes through question and answer in this flashback of exactly what I have been asked as a child, exactly what my daughter, when she grows up a little bit older, will get asked. And so it answers the questions before the child even has to ask them, right?
Yeah.
And then there's certain key parts of it that I intentionally tried to normalize. Intentionally. So one of them was, do you love both of your families? Mm-hmm. And she giggles. Of course, she says, of course I love both of my families. Mm. And it's just like, there's certain pieces like that I thought were important in there. And another one was, I stay in touch with my families through, through texts and pictures and visits and all of that, just like you do with your family. And so those pieces were really important to me in building this out. And then, of course, the Easter egg that she is the girl, so you'll see both of
yes.
them. Obviously the podcast that can't, but she is the girl grown up from the original book. And then for anyone that doesn't know, in the original book, the birth mom has a color, has every character has a color.
And that's what gave it away for me. Is when I was reading through, I was like, I remember that like woman.
Yes.
I know it's just a drawing, but that's what gave it away. And I went and I looked at my book and I was like, oh yeah, it's the same. I love it.
That was exactly my intent. So I'm so glad you guys caught it. And then yes, Wanda makes an appearance. Both Wanda the stuffed animal and Wanda the actual owl kind of flies by the window in the very end.
Oh, I love it. Yes.
I do love it. And it is so sweet and innocent how the little boy is, or her friend is asking the questions. Just honestly, questions kids would ask without, ask. Like, how did your families meet? And you have two families. It's really sweet. And then it's just kind of, she explains it with so much joy and like with so much like, I'm so special, which makes me feel, I love
and confidence.
Confidence.
That was another thing I wanted her to show.
Oh, it's so sweet.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
And because you have such a unique perspective being an adoptive mom and adoptee, and you talked about this a little bit, you've already said this, but like the perspective you have in writing this book is a little bit personal and also just what you hope for your daughter too, like that her friends will understand and know, and it won't, that adoption won't be like this quote unquote weird term or weird thing about you. So speaking to that a little bit, like when you were writing this, how did your perspective like come into play?
Sure. So I think that it was key in all of this, the fact that, being both an adoptee and now an adoptive parent, in the sense of I know exactly the questions the kids are going to ask, I know, even like you could see the expressions on his face, like he's scratching his head. He's like, what? Like you have two moms? Or she's like, yeah, I actually have two families, And so I think for me, knowing that and being able to kind of think through both of those perspectives, I wanted the book to be through a child's eyes of learning. And then, all of the other components that we talked about in the confidence and self-esteem around being adopted. So to show that so clearly from the adoptee answering the questions and all of that was just it was really important to me. And like I said, my hope is that this can help educate the nieces, nephews, cousins, friends, so that they understand it better. And then if they have conversations, it's deeper, other additional questions, right? And so that some of that lift of education that we put on young adoptees, that we unknowingly put on them, because we are not having the conversation with the clerk at the grocery store, because we're trying to just stop that conversation with weird comments and just get to whatever next errand we have to run. And so here I think that, helping to educate the kids can help to take that burden off. It's the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I also like that you are helping kids outside of the bubble to know that it's okay to talk about too, because I feel like in some ways and in some situations where they're like, maybe telling parents like, oh, mom, I think she's adopted, like parents that are uncomfortable with it might be like, well, don't talk to her about that. Don't ask her about that. You're not supposed to talk about that. And like, it's natural childhood curiosity to say, oh, what? Tell me about that. And like giving them permission and also like giving them the correct terminology to use, or the correct, like the nice way to ask. I know, you know what I mean? Like through reading the book. So I feel like it's nice that it gives them that permission too of like, no, it's not taboo. Like you can absolutely ask your friend about it and, in this kind way.
Yeah,
I love that. I hadn't thought about that before, but that's true that a lot of cases, parents are nervous about kids asking too much about different things, right? And if you talk to really most parents of, children that have something that other kids need to learn about, right? So whether it's adoption, whether it's, something else, right? We want the kids to learn. So we actually want to encourage the questions, and we don't want anything to be hush hush. And the adoptee is confident and proud of being adopted. And so like it's a fine thing to ask. And so that is the hope. And I will say that when we were preparing for our adoption and we were excited and we were getting all of our books together and getting all of our stuff together, I kept getting asked by my husband's cousin, I want to prepare our kids. Like what do I do? And I was just like, well, we'll talk about adoption to blah, blah, blah. But now I finally have a resource to give them to say, here you go, read this to your child so that they can understand it. And then they can, of course, come to my child or myself and ask whatever questions they might have in addition. But it does just open up that conversation and comfort level.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. And that is a whole nother audience I didn't think about either. I mean, clearly you're like, if you have a child that joined your family through adoption, you could gift that to friends or give that as a resource. But I didn't think about also like family members, like say cousins that are really young and they're used to seeing like the baby grow in the belly. And now this baby just came into the family. Like that helps explain it to even family members as well.
That's exactly.
Siblings.
Yeah, I did a panel for this book where I read it to a group of individuals to get their opinion and to get a sense of like, okay, who's the right audience for this? And a neighbor showed up and she said, I am dying for a book like this because she said, my kids did not understand that my neighbor who they saw every day that was not pregnant then came home with a child. And she's like, this is what, and she said, I tried, but she's like, I was just failing with everything I was saying. And she's like, cause I don't even know anyone adopted. This is the first person I know is this child. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. I hadn't even thought of that. And then teachers were part of the panel too. And I think this one is more appropriate for teachers in the classroom than the other one, because the other one very much is educating the adoptee. And we don't want to ever make an adoptee like stand out in a classroom unless they want to. And so this is a good opportunity where it can be like an education for all, because as we all know, November is National Adoption Awareness Month. And so it's a great way to add diversity as well into the classroom.
Yes. Oh, gosh, that is so good. Now I love how you said this at the beginning of the episode, is that your goal is to change the adoption narrative from lucky child to loved child. And I absolutely love that. And your goal is to do that through children's literature and through this education you're doing. So where did that come from? Like where was that in you? Was there like a moment you're like, gosh, I'm sick of hearing it as an adoptee, or where? I'm curious where that came from.
That is an excellent question. So for, I know that I've known you guys for like a year. So for anyone listening that did not listen to the episode a year ago, I am adopted. I was born in 1979 from a closed adoption. Went straight from the hospital to my adoptive family's home, right? And so I will say that back then there were 2 books. I don't know if there were more on the market. I just owned 2. My brother's also adopted, similar type of adoption. So infant, domestic adoption, and closed. And we had these 2 books, and they were very factual. They were very factual. They were fine books. I still have them. I still feel they're appropriate to read to my youngest daughter. But something happened between 1979 and now. Something happened. And I don't know. I have assumptions. I have thoughts, but I think a lot of it is that several celebrities like adopted from other countries and people interpreted that. So I bet you if you had a conversation with those celebrities, they would also agree they were not saving a child. Mm-hmm. But the media and everybody else made it sound like they were saving a child. So this saviorism, this lucky narrative is new. So when I was preparing for when my husband and I were preparing for the birth and adoption of our youngest daughter, I bought all the books and I sat in the nursery and I was like sitting in the rocking chair. I'm like, oh, I'm going to read these books. I started reading them and I'm like, oh my God. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And so some ranged from really cringeworthy to making me cry. Right. So a lot of them had the lucky narrative. Others just were imbalanced. Right. So they would talk about, the adoptive parents' love, but the struggle of the birth mom. Instead of adoptive parents also had struggle and there's also love from the birth mom. Always like imbalanced. But it was the lucky one that really got to me because that's the one that'll have lasting damage. Right. Yeah. So that's where people grow up feeling like they need to be people pleasers. They feel they need to be grateful for their own existence, which no one should. And let's be honest, we're all adoptive parents. Who is the lucky one in the entire adoption story? It is always the adoptive parents, right? Because in our case, our daughter was loved. She's very loved still to this moment by her birth family. She would have been loved by any of the hundreds of adoptive parents that were on that waiting list that wanted to love and raise her. So she has always been loved. Always. Before she was born, she was loved by many, many, many people. Yeah. We are the lucky ones. And so when I saw that in the books, that is why this is my mission and my passion, to change how we talk about adoption, how we look at adoption. I even do little groups on people will see movies and TV shows and say, okay, what do you think? And I'll be like, well, this part's representative. You know, I think this part you might want to talk to them about, or, you know, different components like that, because you want to make sure that they know how it really is, right? That the birth mom chose us. They are not chosen. The children are never chosen. There's all of that language around it, and just understanding the impact that language has on the child long term. And so that was my focus and my push. Was I wasn't used to seeing that growing up.
Yeah. And you even write about in this book, when you're saying there are lots of people who wanted to raise me. There are other families who would have loved me. And that you right there, just what you were saying, you were explaining in this book. And so I love that you made it so clear that this child, this adoptee even knows that. Like I would have been loved by so many, and my parents are so lucky that they were chosen by my birth mom. I really do like that you put that in there. I remember that as I was reading through. I was like, ooh, I love that part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. It's just more understanding and messaging around how adoption actually works today.
Yes.
Yeah. And honestly, it did kind of work like that back in the day. They just didn't have names and pictures. So, growing up and finding out more around my birth family, they did select my parents based on the information that were given. So it's just that nobody ever knew this kind of information before.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And they, I mean, we can talk about this. I'm sure we've talked about this so many times about how open and closed adoption is just changed so much over the last several decades of, women didn't know they could ask or advocate for themselves in the way of wanting open adoption with the family they chose. So that, we always talk about that, but you did grow up in a closed adoption.
I grew up in a closed adoption.
Yeah. And in the 70s, 80s, that really wasn't abnormal. Am I correct?
It would have been, so it was just the thing. It was how adoption was. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for open adoption. And I'll give the definition. I know people listen to you guys and you guys talk about closed and open adoption all the time, but I get it a lot because I'll hear adoptive parents even using the term wrong. So they'll say, our relationship, isn't going well. The birth mom hasn't talked to us in a while, so our adoption has changed to be closed. That's incorrect. So I just want to make sure that all the listeners know closed adoption means that my birth mom and dad's names on my original birth certificate are legally sealed from me. This is not something that got released to me when I was 18. I am 44 years old and they are still legally sealed from me. And I've tried to go through red tape to get it. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think people need to understand how much the laws are built against adoptees in the past. And so having that name makes it open. And then it's a spectrum from there to how deep that relationship is. You know, Mel, I love seeing pictures of you with your kids and the birth mom and Disney. It's like my favorite. But like there's just that spectrum of like how deep and close the relationship is and how close you live to each other. But once you get names, it's open. And that's why 90+% of adoptions in the United States are open adoption. The only time it would be closed is a big exception where you're going through just a lawyer, not an agency. Very few agencies will allow them anymore. And it has to be the birth parents are
asking for that.
insisting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm curious. Mel and I talk about this a lot, you know, because what we do at Funding Love is post placement. You know, we do post placement stuff for adoptees or for adoptive families for birth moms. And I'm curious, do you feel as an adoptee that you have community or resources or support that you've needed, like as you've become an adult adoptee? Have you felt like you're longing for support or community? And do you feel like there's more needed? I'm just curious because we don't often get to talk to many adoptees on here, and we wish we could talk to more. That we really do, and I love your voice. So I'm just curious to your thoughts on that personally.
Yes. I'm so glad you asked that. That's why I love you guys and what you're doing. You're like one of the few that do anything about post-placement. And some adoption agencies will say, oh, we hold like an annual picnic or something, right? That, you know, it's like community, that is helpful. So I want to start there.
Sure.
An annual picnic is still helpful. But community and building the community. And I think, you know, with what you guys do and people go on these trips together and build these bonds, you know, friendships and bonds with these other families, it is like very, very special. And so for me, I grew up basically only knowing my brother. It's the only other adoptee I knew. I didn't even know of a single celebrity adopted. And now there's more adoption shown in movies and TVs and stuff, sometimes accurately, sometimes not, but it's more prevalent, right?
My daughter's favorite is Princess Leia. She was adopted and she loves knowing that. I was like, yes.
I love it. I love it. So it's such a strong woman influence too.
For sure.
So yeah. So to me, I think anything where you can strengthen the community for adoptees, for me, it took really being an adult and honestly adopting our daughter for me to start really forming community with other adoptees. And other adoptive parents as well. But just realizing that I need that and that I want that and that I crave that. And then it's also other people that understand where I've been, where you realize later when you talk to people and they'll say different things and you realize, oh, maybe they can't relate to, you know, to my situation, you know? And so having a community in your life, you know, you can always have friends outside of it, but to have a community in your life and a safe place to go to ask questions or bring concerns or to just talk about things is really helpful. So I love the work that you guys are doing, building all of these bonds with folks. And yeah, I think even more post-placement support is needed.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a conversation, Mal and I did with somebody recently who was talking about her experience as an adoptee, and she felt like between the ages of like 18 and 25, there was so much, like, I don't want to say confusion. I don't know if that's the word, but so much of like curiosity and seeking and really wanting to know who she was and where she came from. Like so much of that identity that she felt like, gosh, if I would have had a community in that time during those critical ages in that time frame, she was like, I felt like I would have been, I don't even know the word, but she's like, I longed for it. She's like, I did.
Yeah.
I felt like I could have used it and I needed it. And looking back, I know it would have been helpful for me. So that is why it's constantly in our heads to think about, we're trying to love on all corners of the triad and build that community. And yeah, that is a place that we do often think about. Like,
we're asking that question, because I know that technically we are supporting children adoptees by helping them to bond to their families and meeting other adoptees in Disney World. But as a child, they're not going to go call up an adoptee friend unless the parents are, whatever. But is there a space for adult adoptees, and is there support that's needed for adult adoptees to come together? So I think we're still navigating, asking those questions and trying to figure out what that looks like as well. Because even it's so funny, yesterday, my son, who's 7, came over to me and I was just cleaning out a closet and he comes over and he's like, hey, and he says one of his friends' names. Hey, is he adopted? And I said, oh no, bud, he grew in his mom's belly. And he's like, okay, well, what about, and he asked his little brother's name. What about him? I said, okay, no, in their family, they all grew in her tummy. And he's like, okay. I said, buddy, are you trying to figure out all of your friends that are adopted too? And he said, yeah. And we have quite a few because we have a community. So we went through and we named all of them. And he was like, oh, yeah. And then the conversation just ended and he just walked off. It was all he needed to know was which of my friends, kind of have my same story.
Is like
me. Yeah.
And
I was like, anything else? He's like, no. And walks off. I'm like, yeah. Okay. But it was funny trying to navigate to get at, I'm like, what's the real question here, buddy? Cause I don't think it was just about that friend. So it's just funny how we crave that community. And I know that it doesn't just go away, like you say, cause you're over 18, oh, okay, I'm out of childhood now. So clearly that's, not something I'll think about or want anymore. So I don't know. Yeah. So if you ever have thoughts on that, you can hit us up.
Yeah. Sure. I want to start by saying you guys are setting a great foundation. So again, how I was thinking about how do I educate adults when they're children. Yeah. So I think setting this foundation and the fact that these families can bond on a trip. That's a big commitment. That's a big thing. And so them bonding and being able to stay in touch throughout the years or not stay in touch for a couple of years and then reach out when something happens, to have that community is critical. And I would think if you're thinking about anything, maybe focus on teens. Focus on teens because us adults we're a little different because our adoptions are very different. So we're more in the realm of, have you taken a DNA test to find out your birth family because you can't through the legal systems. So we're more of that kind of situation. But we obviously still need support and community as well. But I think teens, and especially now, teens with open adoption, helping navigate those mixed feelings where you're rebellious against your family. So maybe you're drawn more to the birth family, that kind of stuff. And to give them a bigger community, I think would be really helpful.
I love that.
I do love that. Yeah. That got my wheels turning a little bit.
Yes, for sure.
There you go.
I do love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us again and talking about this book and having this open dialogue just about adoption and the importance of education. This is so good for people to hear. And I can't wait for people to get their hands on your book. So tell our listeners, where can they find your book, and remind us again when it's available?
Sure. So it's Learning About My Friend's Adoption. It is available on Amazon on the 24th of October. You can also ask your local library to carry it. They love getting requests like that. And you can also check out our website, ouradoptionbooks.com. We often have discounts, and that's the only way to get the plushie, by the way.
Nice.
Through our individual website. So yeah.
Perfect.
That's awesome. We'll have all of that in our show notes too for those who want to just click a link and make it easy. We will certainly do that. But Allison, before we go, we'd like to ask a fun little question, because at the Funding Love podcast, we want to end all the episodes with a little extra love. So what is one thing that you are loving right now in life?
Yes. So I have been trying to put on a different lens, right?
Ooh.
So, I work full time and I'm an author and a parent. And so it's always busy, go, go, go. And I'm trying to put on a different lens when I look at things. So last night, It was raining pretty hard when I picked the girls up, and I'm like, what do you guys want to do? Like, should we cuddle and put a movie on or something? And they're like, no, we want to get our rain boots on and go jump in all the puddles. And I was like, heck yeah. And so we went out and just got drenched. I mean, we have the gear. We live in Oregon, but it's just like, it was just really fun to just be out there in the pouring rain and both of my girls just splashing and just getting wet. And I loved it.
Oh, that's so fun.
So, yeah, enjoying the little moments. That's what I would say.
And letting go of somewhat of the structured routine from time to time.
Saying yes to some of the mess or the uncomfortable or yes.
I like that. Saying yes to the mess.
Saying yes to the mess. Oh, gosh. Well, this was a blast. Allison, thank you again. We're so grateful for you and your voice. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into this episode of the Funding Love Podcast. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Funding Love Podcast. Before we go, I just wanted to remind you that before our next episode airs, our pre-sale for our Funding Love Garden Gala will be on sale. If you have attended last year's gala, you will be included in our loyalty pre-sales that go on sale October 15th. Then our official ticket sales will go on sale November 1st. We can't wait to see you all at the Garden Gala. There are still some sponsorships available, so be sure to email us at hello@fundinglove.com to claim those. At Funding Love, we are a crowd-funded nonprofit, which means that people like you can make a lasting difference in the adoption community through your generous support. You can donate at fundinglove.com/donate. And remember that every purchase from our shop also goes towards our mission. When you partner with us, you are funding love.